Deputy Mattie McGrath, on behalf of the regional, or the behalf of the rural independent.
I too want to be, on behalf of the rural independents, want to thank Gachéin, over so Cruig share over. It's an hospital in Lochgarman, and we support the ongoing efforts there. And there was Red Cross units, Callis O'Connell and others from Tipperary town, as far away as that. And that's the spirit of the Mehel that we like to see, and hopefully all will end well. Oftentimes when we discuss the disaster of housing policy in Ireland, we focus on the plight of the homeless, first-time buyers and indeed renters. Today, however, I wish to highlight the plight of a vulnerable cohort of our population that are also caught up in our housing crisis, those being our elderly and people with disabilities who rely on grant assistance to upgrade, adapt or repair their homes. The importance of the housing aid for the elderly, older people's grant, the mobility aids grant and the housing adaptation grants for people with disabilities, enabling people to live independently in their homes for longer, cannot be overstated. These grants have seen people improve people's lives and well-being in the past and seem to have long and happy lives. But unfortunately, the grants are outdated and way behind what they should be. Firstly, the grant ceilings that have not been increased in 13 years, despite the unprecedented increase in construction costs, with rising costs of materials and also the shortage of skilled labour in Ireland, which is putting the cost of these upgrades and associated essential works beyond the reach of the very recipients of these schemes were designed to assist, and that's very, very serious. Secondly, there are considerable waiting times for people waiting grant approval nationwide, which is keeping people out of their homes until these essential adaptation works are completed. Today, 14% of our population are in the over 65 bracket, which is going to go up to 23% in coming years. Therefore, these grants are going to be increasingly crucial for growing cohort of individuals, their respective families, to ensure our nursing homes and hospitals are not overwhelmed. And that is the urgency of it, Taoiseach. Thirdly, the current fixed price grant rates, which is respective housing application grants operate, is no longer fit for purpose. The maximum grant levels of 8,000 under the housing aid for the older people, 3,000 under the mobility awards grants, and 30,000 housing adaptation grant, which is with people with disability, have not been increased for over 13 years. And the costs of building costs and labour and materials, we all know, I don't have to tell you. Therefore, I'm demanding that these respective grants schemes be urgently reviewed, with a maximum grant rate drastically increased. I fully support calls for disability groups for the grant ceilings to be doubled, which would result in a maximum grant aid of 60,000, because people want to do these, people are happy in their homes, and they have a better outcome of health and life expectancy in their homes. So we need to have realistic figures that people can do these grant schemes and apply for the grants in a timely manner.
Taoiseach, please.
Thank the Deputy for raising this very important issue. Agus Tá Cartige Oireachtas Cahmi Gachéin rud is federling a dhéanamh ó thaobh na daoine is sa tír seo na daoine sínsúire agus ó thaobh cuasaí taíochta agus tá rialtas ag déarú seo agus tá ag cur níos mó áisne fáil na Mardis áitiúile fud na tíre. I want to first of all say to the Deputy that first of all, in terms of housing more generally, we have allocated very substantial resources to housing and to housing need. And I would be familiar with many of these grant schemes, and I think they've been very effective, actually. And many people have used them to good effect in terms of senior citizens, in terms of using them in terms of adaptation. And of course, there's a wide continuum in terms of adaptation. It can be fairly basic provisions to enable mobility around the house, stair lifts and so on like that, or of course to the conversion to bedrooms and shower facilities, either downstairs to prepare for the future. And I will ask the Minister for Housing to review the grants thresholds. These are thresholds. In many instances, people won't have to use the maximum, depending what their they're applying for. But it is the objective of government to keep people in their homes for as long as possible. And I think to prevent falls, for example, in homes, and then in terms of those with disabilities, to ensure independent living, and that the wherewithal is there to facilitate that through capital works, through the adaptation programmes, but also through independent living assistance and other supports of that kind. Now, you've identified 3 grants: the grant assistance to the elderly, you've identified the mobility grant and the adaptation grants. And the numbers have been fairly, I'll go back and get the precise numbers, but depending on the local authorities, there's been a consistency in terms of use of these grants on an annual basis. But I think what you're raising is now the fact, with the increased costs and so on like that, that the gap between the grant and the cost of a particular adaptation is becoming too challenging for people to avail of the grants in the first instance. So I will ask the Minister to review those in the context of the next budget and to take on board issues that have been raised in that respect.
Yes, the grant has been good and widely availed of, but the times have surpassed them, and energy costs and costs of materials and labour, people can't get the work done within the schemes, and the eligibility is too low in the first instance. It hasn't moved on in 13 years, as I said. Ireland is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which places a serious onus on the signatories to fully recognise the equal rights for all persons with disabilities to live in the community and to have equal choices to others. So we have obligations there also, and I understand the crisis that's in housing, but this is an area to keep people in their houses, keep them out of nursing homes, out of the hospitals, and keeps them happy in their homes, near their neighbours and friends and family. And as all we want is a tweaking of the scheme, because it hasn't been tweaked in 13 years. The levels haven't, the eligibility levels haven't increased for first of all to avail of it, and then the amounts granted and matching are anywhere near catching up to what they should be. And there's a huge shortfall, maybe 10, 12, 15,000, and quite frankly, people with disabilities and elderly people can't get that money.
Tánaiste, to conclude on this matter.
First of all, we adhere to and support the UN resolution that or human rights aspect that you articulated there. And actually, there has been progressive decongregation over the years, and sometimes that has been controversial as we seek to ensure that people with disabilities can live in their communities and live in their homes. And I think that's extremely important that we continue with that, although we must do it sensitively and in full consultation with families. But if you look over the last 2 decades, there's been very substantial deinstitutionalisation around the entire disability sector, and into the future, the objective is to facilitate people living in the community. And there's been some very good schemes where that has been organised and facilitated. And likewise then, in terms of people living in their own homes, we have to provide the necessary supports in terms of the grants, but you've raised the issue of the eligibility thresholds in terms of those who are potentially excluded from availing of this. Local authorities always prioritise medical needs, as you know, in terms of the allocation of funding under these grant schemes. But I think we'll continue to keep these matters under review.
Very good.